Michael Jackson. Well, you know, I think Michael Jackson had like he was the greatest, you know, and you know, everybody talked about him, had talked about him a lot, you know, and he was famous for his music, his talent, and his albums. Yeah, Thriller is one of the best albums of all time. You know? Yeah.
The Jackson estate in Encino, California, became a shrine to Michael, with flowers, balloons, and messages strewn along the walls and outside the gates, as fans gathered to pay their last respects. Accompanied by longtime family friend, Reverend Al Sharpton, Michael's father, Joe, took in the tributes and shook hands with his son's grieving fans.
And the family and I are very proud to see all of you come out here and help us with this whole situation, because we know that we do have fans all over the world. We know that we are loved all over the world. But one thing that I wish could have happened, I wish that Michael could be here to see all this, have to wait till something happened like this before it could be realized.
Meanwhile, over in Gary, Indiana, the house where Michael and his 8 siblings grew up had also become a mecca for grieving fans and neighbors who still remembered baby-faced Michael from his days as the youngest member of the Jackson 5.
It hurt to know that Michael passed on, but he'll always be remembered. And right here in Gary, Indiana, we would always love the Jackson 5s. Regardless of whatever they say about them or whatever happened in the past, we here in Gary love the Jacksons.
In the morning of the 7th of July, 2009, the LA sky remained respectfully overcast as thousands of Michael Jackson fans gathered outside the Staples Center, where just 2 weeks before, their idol had sung and danced for the last time. Of the 1.5 million hopefuls who had registered in the free ballot, those lucky enough to have won tickets quietly filed in for his memorial.
We were in shock when we got the email. I didn't believe him. I thought it was a joke. So, I mean, it really feels special, and then to be here is just to see everybody that wishes they could be here. I mean, I saw people crying by the train, so it really do feel special.
The 10 a.m. ceremony, watched by millions around the world, opened to the strains of the Andreas Crouch Choir, as Michael's golden casket was wheeled onto a spotlit ramp in front of the stage by his brothers. The emotional tribute continued with Mariah Carey singing the Jackson 5 classic, I'll Be There. There were also performances by Stevie Wonder, Lionel Richie, Usher, and Jermaine Jackson, who sung his brother's favorite song, Smile. Then there were the tributes.
We had him. Whether we knew who he was or did not know, he was ours and we were his. We had him, beautiful, delighting our eyes. He raked his hat slant over his brow and took a pose on his toes for all of us.
He was driven by his hunger to learn, to constantly top himself, to be the best. He was the consummate student. He studied the greats and became greater. He raised the bar and then broke the bar.
So as we begin to talk about the video and what he wanted me to do, the chef brought me out the grilled chicken, but he brought Michael out a bucket of Kentucky Fried Chicken. And I went crazy like, wait a minute, Michael, you eat Kentucky Fried Chicken? That made my day. That was the greatest moment of my life.
When he started wearing the glove, I was like, what's up with the glove? I was like, look, if you're going to hold my hand, I better be the non-gloved one because sequins really hurt me. He would dig in. He'd just shake his head and he would just smile. He loved to be teased.
It's my little brother over there. And you just don't think that you're going to see or you'll live to see him gone. But he will never really be gone. He is going to live forever and ever and ever and ever.
As you know, I'm lost for words. I was his voice and his backbone. I had his back. So did the family. But we thank you. That's all I can say. We thank you very much.
Just wanted to say, sweetheart, speak up. Ever since I was born, Daddy has been the best father you could ever imagine. And I just wanted to say I love him so much.
Fiercely protected from the prying eyes of the press, 11-year-old Paris was speaking in public for the very first time. Her upbringing could not have been more different from that of her beloved father, who by the same age had already made the world stage his home. After 4 decades in the spotlight, it was time for the King of Pop to take his final bow. Alongside his record-breaking achievements as an artist, Michael Jackson also scaled new heights as a humanitarian. His support of a staggering 39 charities helped set the standard for the wave of celebrity philanthropy now sweeping its way across Hollywood. Joining the fight against HIV/AIDS long before it was fashionable, he financed a raft of good causes to the tune of $300 million over the course of his career. In 1992, he launched his Heal the World Foundation with $1 million donation from Pepsi. And in 1999, he staged a series of concerts in aid of South African President Nelson Mandela's children's charity.
He has certainly been my inspiration to want to do something before the end of the century, to undertake what I call an adventure of humanity before the birth of the millennium. I love this man very much, and I love Africa.
Along the way, he donated $1.5 million to the burns unit that treated him after the Pepsi accident, and given his entire $5 million share of the Jackson 5 Victory Tour to charity. Along with Lionel Richie, he'd written the 1985 charity single, We Are the World, which raised millions of dollars for hunger relief in Africa. He donated the proceeds from his single Man in the Mirror to a holiday camp for children suffering from cancer, and supported untold campaigns for racial equality. But the cause closest to his heart was his own Heal the World Foundation, and its spin-off organization, Heal the Kids, which was dedicated to the cause of boosting children's welfare. At the Heal the Kids launch in 2001, Michael's emotional speech turned into an impassioned plea.
Are we blind to the fact that our children are raging against the indifference, crying out against the abandonment, of thundering against the neglect? Heal the Kids is about doing something about making a difference and trying to help adults and parents realize that it is our power to change the world that our children live in. Who among us would have believed that the sound of children at their playgrounds would be replaced by the sound of automatic machine gun fire at our schools? That the sound of little girls skipping rope would be overshadowed by the frantic shrills of children dodging bullets? Yet, instead of loving our children more, we installed metal detectors in our school.
His dedication to healing the world included organizing an airplane full of supplies for the homeless and needy in war-ravaged Sarajevo. It took him to poor countries like Namibia, where he joined with African leaders in a call for debt relief. As well as treating fans in one of the world's poorest countries to 3 concerts, he'd scheduled his visit to coincide with the annual African Economic Forum, and pledged funds to make the world a better place for children. He also spoke of the need to create global investments that would bring economic power to the people, and promised that he would, as always, put his money where his mouth was. It was just one more example of Michael Jackson's generosity and sensitivity towards those less privileged than himself. In a life that brought him as much adversity as advantage, even when the burdens of his own troubles seemed too much to bear, he always kept love in his heart for those who needed it most. Michael Jackson was just 11 years old when the spin doctors at Motown Records set about turning him into a media sensation. By taking 3 years off his age and claiming that the family act had been discovered by the label's biggest star, the Motown marketing machine ensured that the last great act to roll off Berry Gordy's assembly line gained maximum publicity. And so the obsession with Michael Jackson began. Exalted one day, vilified the next. The most important thing was to sell newspapers. In the complications and contradictions that went hand in hand with Michael Jackson's musical genius, they found their ultimate cash cow, and they milked it for all it was worth. By the mid-'80s, he'd become the most successful entertainer of all time, and his every move made the headlines. It didn't seem to matter how much of those stories were true, as long as people were reading them. In 2002, having already coined the phrase wacko jacko, the media went to town on the so-called baby dangling incident in Berlin. Eager to introduce his newest baby to the screaming fans outside his hotel in Germany, Michael held little blanket over the edge of the balcony for a split second. That impetuous action was to bring the wrath of the world's media upon his head, just 2 months before he was arrested on child abuse charges.
I will say that I am particularly upset by the handling of this mass matter by the incredible, terrible mass media. At every opportunity, the media has dissected and manipulated these allegations to reach their own conclusions.
After years of trying him in the press, the media was already handing down a guilty verdict before Michael even made it into the courtroom for the first day of a trial that would last for 5 grueling months.
Unfortunately, it is a molestation case like many others. The difference, obviously, is that the defendant is Michael Jackson, and therefore the attendant publicity is enormous. And so the case gets blown out of proportion in terms of its underlying importance legally. It really becomes more of a media spectacle than anything else.
However, the press weren't about to go away. And as the trial wore on, Michael was clearly becoming more and more bowed down with the intense pressure of facing the biggest challenge of his life in the glare of the spotlight. Still, the attention didn't let up. The military-style media operation saw journalists and camera crews digging themselves in for the duration, with their marquees and catering units, poised to beam every humiliating highlight to newsrooms and photo agencies around the world.
Well, I think his notoriety hurts him in terms of his ability to have a fair trial. I mean, anyone who is so well known, people are going to divide along, lines of yes, I believe him, no, I don't believe him, long before the court proceedings start, and I think that's unfortunate.
For all the sensationalist and biased reporting, which focused on his enthusiastic interactions with fans and late appearances in court, Michael was acquitted on all charges. But while Michael's destiny as a paparazzi magnet had long since been sealed, he remained fanatical about maintaining the privacy of his precious children. Although his habit of hiding their faces behind scarves and veils while out in public only incurred more ridicule from the press, he persisted in his determination to protect them from the media circus that had surrounded him his entire life and prevented him from enjoying any semblance of normality. As Reverend Al Sharpton assured them at Michael's memorial, there wasn't anything strange about their daddy. What was strange was what he had to deal with.
This is a message from 3-in-1, and from all those kids I like having fun.
His music captured the imagination and hearts of young fans all around the world. It didn't matter how isolated or remote, wherever Michael Jackson touched down, people flocked to welcome him. By the mid-1980s, his record-breaking album sales, trademark dance moves, devotion to charity, and transcendence of racial barriers had transformed him into a truly global phenomenon. One of his most devoted fan bases lay in Asia, particularly in Japan, South Korea, and Singapore. Unperturbed by the language barriers, fans turned out in droves to welcome him. For Michael, visits to Japan were always a special event. In fact, he once confessed, "I love Japan. It's one of my favorite places in the entire world." On his last trip there in 2005, many of the fans who crammed into the airport were totally overwhelmed to see him. It was a similar story in the UK. Upon the announcement of Michael's live comeback in 2009, the famously reserved Brits cried and chanted his name like overwrought schoolchildren, and wasted no time in snapping up over 1 million tickets to his 50 sellout concerts at London's O2 Arena. Across the channel, his French fans weren't to be outdone in displaying their devotion to the aptly named King of Pop, who'd single-handedly revolutionized popular culture in the 1980s. He touched a global nerve and given birth to an interracial and cross-generational melting pot of Michael Jackson wannabes. Everyone wanted to sing like him, move like him, and look like him. The most fanatical of his followers committed themselves to even more permanent acts of devotion to prove just how much he'd gotten under their skin. Whenever he went out on tour, news of Michael's whereabouts would spread like wildfire, and before long, the faithful would be serenading him outside his hotel. Unlike the media, his millions of fans kept the faith after his humiliating arrest in 2003. There were demonstrations in the street to show support, and protesters convinced of his innocence remained outside the Santa Maria courthouse and were there to hold his hand throughout his entire 5-month trial in 2005.
We came here to support Michael, and we believe he's innocent, and the charges are preposterous, they're ridiculous, and they're nonsense.
As well as cheering him on as he arrived each day, they were there to celebrate his victorious acquittal.
I would like to thank the fans around the world for your love and your support from every corner of the earth. My family, who's been very supportive, my brother Randy, who's been incredible.
For the millions that loved Michael Jackson, all of the controversies, media witch hunts, health problems, and legal issues would never overshadow his untouchable tally of achievements, both as an artist and as a humanitarian. Not only had he rewritten the record books in terms of album sales and tour receipts, he completely transformed the music industry and set a new standard for marketing and sponsorship deals of the future. His innovations on the dance floor had broken all precedents and inspired a whole new generation of performers, while his trailblazing efforts as a global ambassador had sent racial barriers tumbling. Finally, his message of peace and love, along with his tireless dedication to healing the world, had led the way in spawning a new wave in celebrity philanthropy. Closer to home, he reminded every single one of us of our responsibility to help those less fortunate than ourselves. November the 30th, 1982, the world was introduced to the album that would go down in history as the biggest seller of all time. Thriller, his second collaboration with Quincy Jones, was the result of Michael's determination to create the perfect record. Locked away in Westlake Studios in LA with a production budget of $750,000, they emerged with an album that would spend 37 weeks at the top of Billboard charts and would spawn an unprecedented 7 top 10 singles.
I remember not getting my platinum album for singing on PYT, singing the backgrounds on that. Yeah, it was great. What I really remember, though, from Thriller was being in Mike's car and him playing me the entire album. Whenever he would finish a project, he'd share it with me because we were like this growing up. And I remember loving each and every song. I was just, 16, something like that.
But the jewel in the Thriller crown was the 14-minute video to the album's title track. Inspired by B-grade zombie movies and directed by horror supremo John Landis, the short film featured barrier-breaking special effects and debuted the formation dancing that was to become just one of Michael's signatures. With the album selling in excess of 1 million copies a month, Michael was hailed as the savior of the flagging music industry. as well as a champion for racial equality. Music channel MTV, notorious for its neglect of African-American musicians, was forced to play the Thriller video clip twice an hour to cope with viewer demand. Then there were the awards. As well as an incredible 7 Grammys, Michael took out a total of 8 American Music Awards, the Special Award of Merit, and 3 MTV Music Awards.
I saw him for many years. I saw the off-the-wall success and the Thriller success, the super success. Before that, we had other going places. We had other records and parties at Studio 54, but with Thriller, every barrier was broken. Stadiums all over the world were sold out. It became the biggest record of all time.
According to journalist and biographer J. Randy Taraborelli, Thriller stopped selling like a leisure album and began selling like a household staple. It also spawned a bonanza in merchandising sales. Alongside Michael Jackson dolls, T-shirt memorabilia, there were millions to be made from sales of the making of Michael Jackson's Thriller documentary. The so-called one-man rescue team for the music business even had future President George Bush eating out of his gloved hand.
It was fantastic. The 80s were fantastic. It's probably as good as our record business will ever be. I mean, on that basis. Number one, for many reasons, because of vinyl. People would wear vinyl out. They had to go buy 2 and 3 copies. I was lucky. I had the 2 best engineers on the planet, Phil Ramone and Bruce Swedin, and they had they had minors in music. They were both musical and technical sonic minds. And to this day, every city I go to in the world, Shanghai, Shenzhen, wherever, Rio, Cairo, at that magic hour, I hear those records from Don't Stop Till You Get Enough from 30 years ago, and it blows my mind. It really does. But it's all the songs and Michael's talent and the production and everything else, but sonically, it's hard to beat.
Without doubt, Thriller owed much of its phenomenal success to Michael's dazzling performance in the famous 1983 television special to celebrate the 25th anniversary of Motown. Ironically, however, it almost didn't happen.
We were doing the TV show, and the word came back that Michael couldn't do it because he was doing too much television. And I called Michael up and I said, Michael, I know you and you know me, and you know this television show is not a television show. This is Motown 25. And he said, I'll be there. And he came there, and then he did.
In the middle of a rendition of Billie Jean, Michael debuted the legendary dance move that was to seal his reputation as the greatest innovator in pop music. The performance, witnessed by 47 million viewers, was declared a career-defining moment by commentators and drew comparisons with appearances by the Beatles and Elvis Presley on The Ed Sullivan Show in the 1960s. Developed by Michael after studying the great master of mind, Marcel Marceau, the moonwalk has since become one of the best-known dance techniques in the world. Right at the very height of his powers, however, Michael was headed for a date with destiny that would have serious physical and psychological repercussions in his life. A year after releasing Thriller, he signed a record-shattering deal with soft drink manufacturer Pepsi. The $5 million partnership was the first sponsorship deal of its kind and would form the basis of celebrity endorsements of the future. The idea was to lock Michael into a decade-long partnership that would help Pepsi challenge Coca-Cola's dominance of the market. Sadly, however, the plan was about to go very wrong. On the 27th of January, the stage was set for Michael and his brothers to perform Billie Jean as part of one of the Pepsi commercials. During filming, a pyrotechnic effect went wrong. The explosion showered Michael with sparks, setting fire to his hair. 3,000 fans watched in shock as paramedics covered his head and carried him away to hospital.
He came out between these things that exploded like fireworks, and then it looked like the sparks came down on his hair, and he was shaking his head like he thought something was in his hair. And then everybody jumped on him and started squirting water on him, and he got up like he didn't know what was happening, and they took him off.
As Michael began the agonizing recovery process, which included surgery to hide his scalp burns and an introduction to prescribed painkillers, his faithful fans gathered outside the hospital to wish him well. But rather than wallowing in his own troubles, Michael characteristically threw himself into caring for those less fortunate than himself. As well as donating $5 million from the Jacksons' Victory Tour to charity, he co-wrote the single We Are the World with Lionel Richie to raise money for famine relief. Delving into their little black books of A-list artists, he and Lionel pulled in a who's who of the music scene. The single ended up featuring the singing talents of stars like Bruce Springsteen, Dionne Warwick, Tina Turner, Diana Ross, Stevie Wonder, Paul Simon, and Cyndi Lauper. Produced by Quincy Jones in 1985, it ended up selling more than 20 million copies and raising millions of dollars for the poor in the U.S. and Africa. Around the same time, Michael was engaged in a well-publicized battle to buy a catalog of songs by the Beatles that had come up for sale the previous year. Rumors abounded that Michael's aggressive bid had caused a rift with his old friend Paul McCartney, with whom he recorded the hits The Girl Is Mine and Say, Say, Say. Ironically, it had been Paul who had first put the idea of buying the music catalog in his head by telling him how much money was to be made in publishing royalties. And in actual fact, when the Northern Songs catalog came up for sale, although Paul had considered launching a late bid for the songs in league with John's widow, Yoko, he had pulled out of the race, leaving Michael to battle it out with other serious contenders in negotiations that lasted 10 months. He ended up winning the catalog at a cost of $47.5 million. As the 80s wore on, media attention began to focus on Michael's perceived eccentricities. What was really going on behind those aviator sunglasses? First, there was his pet chimp, Bubbles. Then there were reports that he slept in a hyperbaric chamber, talk of plastic surgery, and rumors he bought the bones of the Elephant Man. Many of the rumors were claimed to have been leaked to the press by Michael's own publicists. But despite his insistence that such stories were pure fabrications, the nickname Wacko Jacko stuck. Appearing in public hidden behind a face mask only fueled speculation about his increasingly idiosyncratic behavior, which was rumored to involve bleaching his skin. Michael hit back with claims that the marked change in his skin color was caused by the disease vitiligo, which needed to be covered up with makeup. Through all of the media's attacks, the fans just kept on coming. Swamped at public appearances and record signings, Michael Jackson had become a modern-day Pied Piper of Hamelin. And although he often felt stung by the stories in the press, he clearly reveled in the superstar status that set him apart from ordinary mortals.
Michael Jackson refuses to give in to the rumour that he is not a normal human being. He seems to kind of want people to not believe he's like everybody else. I don't think he should. Why should he? You know, apart from anything else, he's broken every sales record on earth. He has achieved things that nobody else has. So why should he just pretend to be, I don't know, a Damon Albarn from Blur?
Wherever the man in the mask went, he was met with a media frenzy. And like the ringmaster in a three-ring circus, he never forgot his role as entertainer and knew exactly how to work the crowd. Whether popping in to share an intimate photo opportunity with children at a local hospital, making a dash for the limo in front of the paparazzi, or entertaining his beloved fans from the roof of his hotel building, the king of pop never failed to turn on the charm.
Through the years I worked with Michael, the greatest moment of my life was that moment after the show, or a couple days after we would do a photo shoot, when I would show him the bulk of the pictures, and he would look at them and he would say, "That's magic. That's magic." And this is Michael's life. It's all about magic. It's all about creating that magic.
And there was plenty more magic to come. Back in the studio with Quincy Jones, Michael was preparing to release his 7th studio album, his first in 5 years. After recording 30 tracks for the new album, they cut the selection down to 11 songs, and Bad hit the shelves on August the 31st, 1987. As the name suggested, Michael was adopting a tougher street image and bringing plenty of grunt to songs like Dirty Diana, Smooth Criminal, and the album's title track. In all, Michael wrote 9 of the album's 11 songs, 5 of which struck the top of the U.S. singles charts. To this day, Bad remains the only album ever to achieve this incredible feat. Now as popular in the UK as he was in the States, Bad went on to become the 9th biggest selling album in British history. One of the highlights on the album was the bonus track Leave Me Alone, which made fun of the tabloid view of his private life. The video, directed by Jim Blashfield, won the Grammy Award for Best Video and an MTV Music Award. Meanwhile, Michael was preparing to take on his very first world concert tour as a solo artist. Sponsored by Pepsi, the Bad Tour took him to 15 countries over 16 months, during which he played to a total of 4.5 million fans. The first entertainer to earn more than $100 million per year, Michael was becoming increasingly devoted in his responsibility as a philanthropist, donating much of his concert takings to charity and ensuring that at least 400 tickets to every U.S. concert were reserved for underprivileged children. During the tour, Michael bought the ranch in Santa Barbara, California, that would help him fulfill his dream of building his very own amusement park. Renamed Neverland after the fantasy island in the story of Peter Pan, it would become a lavish monument to his extravagantly childlike imagination. Complete with a zoo, 2 railroads, numerous rides, and several lakes, Michael opened Neverland up to children and their families as day visitors. The 2,676-acre property also boasted a huge floral clock. The story goes that Michael himself designed the decorative flower beds because he hated seeing dirt between them. Neverland would remain Michael's own personal fairground for the next 15 years, creating many happy memories for the friends and guests he entertained there until the police investigations of 2003.
I remember an amazing time at Neverland in the amusement park. And when Michael insisted that if I was going to shoot him on a particular ride, I had to ride the ride with him with my hands not on the bar, but up in the air like kids would. And I thought, okay, and I did. This will always be one of my fondest memories of Michael, just having fun.
In 1991, Michael was clearly still having fun as he renewed his contract with Sony. Having been declared the Artist of the Decade by President George Bush, he was able to command a record-breaking sum of $65 million. The same year, he released his 7th studio album, Dangerous. With Teddy Riley and Bill Bottrell on board as co-producers, it went straight to #1 on the Billboard charts and became his fastest-selling album ever in the U.S. Its lead single, Black or White, spent 7 consecutive weeks on top of the singles charts, proving that Michael was still the king of pop. Meanwhile, in the UK and Europe, the album's biggest-selling single ended up being the charity anthem, Heal the World, which also became the name of the charitable foundation Michael set up in 1992.
To heal the world, we must start by healing our children. Today, we come bearing gifts for the children of war-torn Sarajevo. In 1992, Sarajevo has become a symbol of so much that is tragic but avoidable in our world. Prejudice and ethnic hatred, the destruction of the environment, the shattering of families and of centuries-old communities.
One of the Foundation's first missions was to airlift 46 tons of much-needed supplies to war-torn Sarajevo in Bosnia. Another of Michael's early ambitions for the Foundation was to institute drug and alcohol education programs. He was also one of the very first artists to draw attention to HIV/AIDS in the Third World by embarking on several high-profile visits to Africa, and ended up donating all the profits from the ticket sales of his sellout Dangerous tour to his foundation. But back at home, trouble was brewing. On August the 18th, 1993, as Michael prepared to start the third leg of his tour, the Los Angeles Police Department began a criminal investigation into child abuse claims. 3 days later, police arrived to search Neverland and subjected Michael to a 25-minute strip search. The media had a field day.
I will say that I am particularly upset by the handling of this mass matter by the incredible, terrible mass media. At every opportunity, the media has dissected and manipulated these allegations to reach their own conclusions. I ask all of you to wait and hear the truth before you label or condemn me. Don't treat me like a criminal, because I am innocent. I have been forced to submit to a dehumanizing and humiliating examination by the Santa Barbara County Sheriff Department and the Los Angeles Police Department earlier this week. They were supposedly looking for any discoloration, spotting, blotches, or other evidence of a skin color disorder called vitiligo, which I have previously spoken about. The warrant also directed me to cooperate in any examination of my body by their physician to determine the condition of my skin, including whether I have vitiligo or any other skin disorder. The warrant further stated that I had no right to refuse the examination or photographs, and if I failed to cooperate with them, they would introduce that refusal at any trial as an indication of my guilt. It was the most humiliating ordeal of my life.
Michael's family immediately rallied around him and called their own press conference to show their support. They were adamant that the allegations were nothing more than a cruel and obvious attempt to take advantage of Michael's fame and wealth. Their belief was backed up by a taped telephone conversation in which the child in question's father declared his intention to win big time and destroy Michael. Catherine Jackson in particular was unequivocal in her support of her son.
I'd like to let the world know that I'm behind my son. I don't believe any of this stuff that's being written about him because I raised him and I know him, and that's just a statement people are making.
However, not everyone in the Jackson family got behind Michael. His older sister, LaToya, whom he'd neither seen nor spoken to for years, decided to open up to the press. Estranged from the rest of the family since marrying her manager, Jack Gordon, and publishing her autobiography, LaToya held a press conference in Israel and made this shocking statement.
Well, I must tell you that this is very difficult for me, that Michael is my brother. I love him a great deal, but I cannot and I will not be a silent collaborator of his crimes against small, innocent children. And if I remain silent, then that means that I feel the guilt and the humiliation that these children are feeling, and I think it's very wrong.
LaToya later retracted the statement, claiming her abusive husband had forced her to make the claims for financial gain, but the damage had been done. Putting on a brave face for fans, Michael performed in front of a crowd of 47,000 fans on his 35th birthday on the 29th of August. But behind the scenes, he was fighting chronic pain from an accident he'd sustained while on tour, and was so stressed out by the investigation and accompanying press invasion that there were claims he was becoming addicted to painkillers and sedatives. The next night, moments before going on stage in Singapore, Michael collapsed, and to the disappointment of tens of thousands of fans, was forced to cancel the show. The next day, he was taken to hospital to undergo a brain scan.
It appears that Mr. Jackson has been suffering recently from an acute vascular headaches, which unfortunately, due to the severity this evening, caused the cancellation of tonight's performance.
I was suddenly taken ill last night, and I am sorry for the cancellation of my performance, and I apologize for any inconvenience it might have caused my fans in Singapore. I look forward to seeing you at the stadium tomorrow. Thank you for your continued support and understanding. I love you all. Thank you.
Michael's one source of consolation throughout the ordeal was his romance with Elvis Presley's daughter, Lisa Marie. Understanding the pressures of living under the intense glare of the media spotlight, Lisa Marie became his confidant and source of emotional support. During their many conversations over the phone, she ended up falling for him, and they were married in the Dominican Republic in May 1994. Lisa Marie has since revealed that during the marriage, a troubled Michael confessed his fears that he might come to the same tragic end as her father. And after 20 months together, the gulf between the lovers had grown too wide. While Michael had been desperate to start a family, Lisa Marie already had 2 young children from her first marriage to Danny Keough and didn't want any more. On January 18, 1996, her divorce from Michael was finalized, although they would remain friends for the rest of his life. However, the disturbances in Michael's private life hadn't distracted him from his first love, making music. On June 15, 1995, he released the biggest collection of his career. The double album, History, Past, Present, and Future, Book 1, contained 15 former hits and 15 new tracks and would become the biggest selling multiple disc album of all time, with sales of 20 million worldwide. The lead single was a duet with his baby sister Janet. Scream hit back at the tabloid coverage of the 1993 child sexual abuse accusations aimed at him, and the record-breaking $7 million video to the song won him a Grammy Award. Despite all the negative media attention of the past few years, his fans remained as devoted as ever, sending the album's second single, You're Not Alone, straight into the Guinness Book of World Records for becoming the first single ever to debut at the top of the Billboard charts. Over in Britain, it remained at number 1 for 6 straight weeks and became his biggest-selling single ever in the UK. The stage was set for another history-making television appearance. But during rehearsals for the HBO special at the Beacon Theatre in New York, Michael suddenly collapsed and was taken to Beth Israel Hospital on the Upper East Side. Arriving semi-conscious and dehydrated, doctors worked to stabilize his condition as his mother rushed to his side.
When that type of call, it gets a high priority response. It's a very serious call. Luckily, we found someone who was breathing, who was conscious, and we treated him for his symptoms.
What were the symptoms?
As I said, there was some dehydration, some low blood pressure, nothing that appeared to be life-threatening. He was treated by EMTs and paramedics and brought to the hospital of his choice.
Mr. Jackson is conscious. He has expressed sincere gratitude for all the nurses, physicians, and other members of the Beth Israel staff, as well as, of course, the incredible outpouring of love from his fans throughout the world.
5 days later, those fans were still maintaining their vigil as Janet emerged from the hospital. After being diagnosed and cleared of a viral infection, their hero greeted them with smiles and waves before disappearing into the waiting van. After Michael's divorce from Lisa Marie, he turned to dermatology nurse Deborah Rowe to fulfill his dream of having children. When they married in Sydney in November 1996, during the Australian leg of his history tour, she was already pregnant with little Prince Michael I. On April 3, 1998, he was joined by a baby sister called Paris. A father at last, Michael was determined to protect his children from the press. Then, in October 1999, came the news that he and Debbie were getting divorced, and that Michael would retain sole custody of their 2 children. Despite being a single father of 2, he stepped up his already demanding schedule of charity work and broke yet another Guinness World Record. His involvement with a staggering 39 charities far eclipsed the philanthropic efforts of any other celebrity or entertainer. At public appearances and charity events, he was tireless in seeking out those less fortunate than himself. Whether pausing to give out a hug or simply waving and smiling to his fans, he always took the time to acknowledge their devotion. One charity among the many he publicly supported was the AIDS Foundation, created by great friend and fellow former child star Elizabeth Taylor. Liz, who'd stood beside him throughout his troubles with the press, was to prove a wonderful source of support in his battle with Sony to regain control of his album masters and retain ownership of his share of the record company's catalog. Once again, his fans backed him, but as the dispute wore on, Michael believed he was a victim of a personal vendetta by Sony chief Tommy Mottola and turned to Reverend Al Sharpton for help. In 2002, he threatened to sue Sony for failing to promote his album, Invincible.
Sony, Tommy Mottola. Tommy Mottola is the president of the record division. He is a mean, he's a racist, and he's very, very, very devilish.
That inflammatory accusation turned the dispute into an increasingly wild media circus. Sony counterattacked with assertions it had sufficiently promoted the album and with claims that Michael had refused to support its release with a tour of the U.S. Despite the dispute, Invincible was still a commercial success, debuting at #1 in 13 countries and selling around 10 million copies worldwide. In the middle of it all, Michael had become the proud father of a third child, Prince Michael II. His eagerness to introduce baby Blanket to eager fans in Berlin inspired him to embark on the rash act that would hog the world's front pages. The notorious baby dangling incident was seen by the media commentators as evidence that the king of pop had lost all sense of judgment, and although Michael later apologized for his terrible mistake, the stigma haunted him. Michael's most traumatic media ordeal was still to come. On November the 20th, 2003, he was arrested and charged at Santa Barbara Jail with lewd or lascivious acts with a child under 14. Protesting his innocence and confident of an acquittal, he waved to fans on his way to court. As the interminable legal process drew to a close almost 2 years later, his fans never lost faith that Michael would be found not guilty.
Verdict. We, the jury, in the above entitled case, find the defendant not guilty of conspiracy as charged in count 1 of the indictment.
Emotionally and mentally drained, as well as physically exhausted, Michael waved to the faithful in weary relief that the torment was over. But the terrible experience had taken a huge toll, and Michael needed to recover away from the spotlight. After the trial, he flew to the Persian Gulf and stayed as the guest of Sheikh Abdullah in Bahrain. In November 2006, he made a rare public appearance at the World Music Awards in Monaco to receive a Diamond Award for selling over 100 million records worldwide. The visit also coincided with the release of a special 25th anniversary edition of Thriller, a timely tribute to the biggest selling album of all time and a reminder that the king of pop wasn't finished yet. In March 2009, it seemed that the years of waiting had all been worthwhile, when Michael called a press conference in London to announce he was ready to make a spectacular return to the stage. Overcome with emotion at the prospect of a Michael Jackson comeback, the ecstatic crowd wept and chanted his name, and as he took to the microphone for what was to be the very last time, Michael rewarded them with a winning smile and his trademark peace salute.
These will be my final show performances in London. This will be it. This is it. And when I say this is it, it really means this is it. Because I'll be performing the songs my fans want to hear. This is it. I mean, this is really it. This is the final curtain call. Okay? And I'll see you in July.
The tears shed in joy at the announcement of his comeback turned to tears of despair and disbelief when on the afternoon of June the 25th, TMZ.com broke the news that Michael had suffered a fatal heart attack at his rented home in Bel Air. United in their grief, fans across the globe immediately went into mourning. Although most of them had never met their idol or even seen him in the flesh, Michael Jackson's talent and generosity had touched them on such a personal level they felt like they knew him. On July 7th, 1 billion people tuned in to his memorial service to pay their last respects to an artist who will not only be remembered as a consummate entertainer, but also as a great humanitarian, a loving father, and a devoted icon.
I really do. You have to know that I love you so much. Really. From the bottom of my heart.
He is the king of music, not pop, music. In fact, he's just the king. I just love him, and I just love him, and I just love him, and he's pure, he's inside and out, his heart, his soul, I love him.
Michael Jackson changed my life. When I saw him moonwalk, when I heard him sing, when I seen him perform, he was life-changing. He's the greatest artist of our time.
Talent and music, respect. Of course, you have to be young, you have to be beautiful, talented, everything, but Michael Jackson is one of the best.
Michael was and he will remain one of the greatest entertainers that ever lived. One of the greatest entertainers that ever lived.
Well, they said Sammy Davis was the best entertainer ever. I put Michael right up there with him. Michael worked hard. You could see it when he hit the stage.
There will never ever be anyone as talented and as brilliant like Michael Jackson. Yeah.
stop